The old house had been abandoned for decades. It stood on the edge of a forgotten town, swallowed by tangled trees and a fog that seemed almost alive. Children dared each other to run to its doorstep and back, but none ever crossed the threshold. Well, not until Julia moved in. Julia was a young woman, no more than 25, looking for a fresh start. The house, with its sprawling size and rustic charm, seemed like the perfect escape from the bustling city. She ignored the whispers from neighbors, the strange looks when she signed the paperwork, even the realtor's hesitant tone when he handed her the keys. She was determined to make this a home, and she spent her first days sweeping up cobwebs, airing out dusty rooms, and breathing new life into a place that hadn't felt human warmth for years. But beneath the house, something darker was breathing. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. The basement door, thick and old with chipped paint, was locked tight. Julia had tried to open it on her first night, only to find it stuck. Her fingers had tingled when she touched the doorknob, as if a faint pulse thrummed beneath the metal. On the third night, Julia lay in bed, exhausted from the day's work, when she heard a faint, scratching sound. It came from somewhere deep below her, faint but unmistakable, a soft scrape, like tiny nails dragging across wood. She dismissed it as the creaking of an old house settling. Yet the sound continued, steady, relentless. By the fourth night, the scratching had grown louder. She couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the house making noise. It was something inside it, and that something was calling for her, almost beckoning her to come down, to set it free. Finally, curiosity, and an odd compulsion she couldn't explain, pushed her toward the basement door again. This time, the knob turned easily in her hand, almost like it had been waiting for her. The basement was pitch black, the air thick and damp, smelling of rotting wood and something else, something sickly sweet, like decaying fruit. She stepped cautiously, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, catching glimpses of old furniture draped in sheets, broken picture frames, and the remains of things best forgotten. Halfway down the stairs, she noticed something peculiar. Tiny footprints, faint yet unmistakable, in the layer of dust coating the floor. They were small, child-sized, and led deeper into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. A chill gripped her as she followed them, each step taking her further from the faint light of the stairwell, deeper into the oppressive dark. She could feel the weight of the house above her, pressing down, as though it were burying her alive. Then, she saw it, something pale and thin, crouched in the farthest corner of the basement. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows over the figure, illuminating it just long enough for her to see a small, twisted body with skin stretched taut over bones. It looked like a child, but its eyes, they were hollow and dark, filled with an ancient hunger that sent ice flooding through her veins. Its mouth opened in a slow, twisted grin, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth that seemed too big for its small, delicate face. And then it spoke, in a voice that was both high-pitched and scratchy, a child's whisper mixed with the sound of nails scraping across a chalkboard. "Why did you leave me down here?" Julia's heart hammered against her chest as she stumbled back, her eyes locked on the horrific figure crouched in the dark corner. The flashlight trembled in her hand, its weak beam darting across the figure's face, a pale, sickly white face with hollowed cheeks and dark, sunken eyes that looked like empty pits. I don't know you," she stammered, the words feeling feeble and hollow as they left her mouth. The child's grin widened, stretching impossibly far, twisting its face into something almost inhuman. "Yes, you do." Its voice was soft but laced with an ancient, bitter malice. "You left me here, all alone, in the dark." Julia shook her head, backing up slowly, her foot catching on the edge of a broken floorboard. Her mind reeled, scrambling to make sense of what she was seeing, of what the child was saying. It wasn't possible. She had never been here before, never stepped foot in this basement, let alone left anyone down here. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I just moved in." The child took a slow, crawling step toward her, its body moving with jerky, unnatural movements, like a puppet tugged by unseen strings. Its hands, thin and claw-like, scraped along the floor, creating the dreadful scratching sound that had haunted her nights since she'd arrived. Years I've waited for you to come back, the child said, each word drawn out with a strange, chilling familiarity. You left me to starve, to rot. It paused, running its bony fingers over its own skin, picking at it as if the memory alone brought it physical pain. And so I waited, and now you're here. Julia's throat tightened, and she wanted to scream, to flee, but her feet felt cemented to the floor. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the child's hollow eyes. In the dim, flickering light, she caught a glimpse of something scrawled on the walls behind it. Letters, carved deep into the rotting wood, forming a desperate plea that covered every inch of the basement walls. Asterisk, let me out. Let me out. Let me out. Asterisk. Some of the words were scrawled wildly, others scratched over and over in the same spot until the wood splintered and cracked. Blood, old and dried to a dark brown, was smeared across some of the letters, as if the child had used its own fingers, bleeding and raw, to etch them into the wall. The child let out a low, broken giggle that echoed around the basement, a sound that seemed to crawl under her skin and into her bones. You left me here, and now I'm going to stay with you, forever. Julia's legs finally broke free from the paralyzing grip of fear, and she stumbled backward, scrambling for the stairs. But the child was faster than it looked. In an instant, it was on all fours, crawling after her, its head twisted at an unnatural angle, eyes staring up at her with that same, twisted grin. She could feel it behind her, hear the soft, wet sound of its hands and knees scraping over the stone floor as it followed her. Wait, the child's voice called, sweet yet laced with an underlying threat. You can't leave me again. You promised we'd always be together. She bolted up the stairs, each step feeling heavier, her legs weak with terror. She reached the top, her hand on the doorknob, twisting it desperately. It wouldn't turn. The door had locked itself, trapping her with the thing crawling up behind her, getting closer with each heartbeat. Let me out. The child's voice was louder now, almost a scream, filled with rage and desperation. Julia threw her body against the door, her shoulders slamming into it, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the child's cold breath on her ankles, its icy fingers brushing against her skin. She closed her eyes, praying, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would hear her. The silence after Julia's prayer was deafening, like the house itself had drawn a deep breath and held it. She felt that icy hand close around her ankle, its grip inescapably strong, pulling her back toward the black pit of the basement. No, please, she screamed, her fingers digging into the door frame, nails splintering as she fought against the child's unyielding strength. But it was as if the walls themselves were pulling her back, trapping her within the darkness. She could feel her body sliding down, inch by inch, her frantic screams echoing back at her as if the house were mocking her. Then, miraculously, the door burst open, and Julia was flung forward, collapsing onto the floor of the entry hall. Her breath came in gasps, her heart thundering in her chest, but as she looked back, there was nothing. No child, no trace of anyone following her up the stairs. Julia scrambled to her feet, backing away from the basement door, which now hung ajar, revealing nothing but darkness below. She had to leave this house, this town. She wouldn't survive another night here. But as she stumbled toward the front door, her eyes caught sight of something on the wall beside it. A small, weathered photo framed in dull brass. She didn't remember seeing it before, but now, it was impossible to ignore. Her fingers reached out, almost on their own, and she lifted it off the hook, staring into the photograph's faded details. It was a family portrait, a young woman with soft, round features and a haunted smile. Beside her stood a man with eyes shadowed by a sorrow that seemed to radiate from the paper, and clutched between them was a small child, barely 4, with the same hollow eyes that Julia had just seen in the basement. Julia's hands trembled as memories she couldn't explain flooded her mind. That house, that family, the child. Her breathing quickened as flashes of an old story rose to the surface. Whispers, rumors she'd ignored. A couple had once lived in this house, long before it was abandoned. They'd had a child who suffered a strange, consuming illness. When the townsfolk learned of it, they began to fear the child, spreading stories of a curse, of a child born wrong, a child that never slept and seemed to grow hungrier by the day. In time, the rumors turned darker. People spoke of strange occurrences, missing pets, and then missing children. The family, consumed by fear and shame, locked their child away, sealing him in the basement, leaving him to waste away. The child's cries of hunger, of terror, had echoed up through the floorboards night after night, until they finally went silent. Julia dropped the photo, her mind reeling. "This isn't real," she whispered, trying to steady herself. But a creeping sense of recognition gnawed at her, something deep within her that she couldn't ignore. She was drawn back toward the basement door, unable to resist the compulsion. Against every instinct, she stepped down, one shaky foot after another, her eyes adjusting to the thick darkness. The air grew colder, heavier, as she descended. This time, she didn't need the flashlight. She was moving as if guided, as if some part of her had always known this place. And then, at the bottom, she saw him. The child sat hunched against the wall, its eyes still locked on her. But now there was something almost familiar in that gaze, as if he recognized her, too. His voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the basement like a scream. "You came back," he said, his grin stretching painfully wide. "I knew you would." Julia took a step forward, her fear melting into something else, a twisted sense of responsibility. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." The child cocked his head, his eyes narrowing. "You left me to die here," he hissed, his voice trembling with an accusation that went beyond words, beyond time. "You left me, and you forgot." She couldn't explain it, couldn't even fully understand it, but the truth felt like ice in her veins. She had known him, loved him even, long ago, and she had left him here to rot, to die alone in the darkness, his cries unanswered. The child reached out, his hand as cold as death as he took hers. His grip tightened, pulling her closer, his hollow eyes locking onto hers. "Stay with me, then," he whispered, his voice a plea, a curse. "Forever." The basement door slammed shut above them, sealing them both in darkness.